The myth of is not intended as a literal description of the afterlife, but rather as a symbolic representation of the soul's relationship to justice and injustice. The soul that has chosen to live justly will be happy regardless of external circumstances. The soul that has chosen to live unjustly will be miserable regardless of apparent success. This is because justice and injustice are not merely external conditions, but internal states of the soul.
The just soul is one in which reason rules over the emotions and desires, creating internal harmony and peace. The unjust soul is one in which the emotions and desires have overthrown reason, creating internal conflict and chaos. This is why Plato argues that it is better to suffer injustice than to commit it. For the person who commits injustice damages his own soul, while the person who suffers injustice is harmed only externally.
This ethical dimension of Plato's philosophy is inseparable from his metaphysics. The forms are not merely abstract objects of knowledge, but also standards of value. The good is not simply the supreme form, but also the ultimate source of all moral obligation. To know the good is to be compelled to act in accordance with it. For no one does wrong willingly once they truly understand what is right. This intellectualist approach to ethics, the view that virtue is knowledge and vice is ignorance, was one of Plato's most controversial teachings. Common sense suggests that people often know what is right but choose to do wrong anyway. But Plato argues that such people do not truly know what is right, for if they did, they would see that virtue is always in their own best interest.
The soul that has achieved genuine knowledge of the forms has been transformed by that knowledge. It has seen that wisdom is more valuable than wealth, that justice is more beautiful than injustice, that temperance brings greater pleasure than indulgence. Such a soul cannot be tempted by inferior goods because it has tasted the supreme good and found it infinitely more satisfying.
This transformation of the soul through knowledge is the ultimate goal of Plato's educational program. The philosopher king of the Republic is not someone who has been trained in political techniques, but someone who has been transformed by the vision of the good. His authority comes not from popular acclaim, but from his direct knowledge of what is truly valuable and truly real. But Plato was realistic about the difficulties of implementing such a program in the actual world. The Republic itself acknowledges that the ideal state is unlikely to exist on Earth. It serves rather as a pattern laid up in heaven, a standard by which we can measure actual states and find them wanting. The philosopher must be content to rule over the city within his own soul, creating there the harmony and justice that may be impossible to achieve in the external world. This emphasis on the inner life is characteristic of Plato's mature philosophy. While he never abandoned his concern with political questions, he increasingly focused on the individual soul's relationship to eternal truth. The academy he founded was not a school for training politicians, but a community for the cultivation of wisdom. Its graduates might go on to careers in politics, but their primary loyalty was to philosophy itself.
The influence of the academy extended far beyond Athens. Students came from throughout the Mediterranean world, and many of them founded schools of their own when they returned home. The tradition of philosophical education that Plato established would continue for nearly 1,000 years, until the Emperor Justinian closed the academy in 529 CE.
But even after the academy's closure,
Plato's influence continued to spread. His works were preserved and studied by Islamic, Jewish, and Christian scholars throughout the Middle Ages. The Renaissance saw a revival of interest in Platonic philosophy, and the modern world has continued to grapple with the questions he raised and the answers he proposed.
What accounts for this enduring influence? Why do Plato's ideas continue to speak to us across the centuries? Perhaps it is because he addressed the deepest questions of human existence with a combination of logical rigor and poetic vision that has never been surpassed. He showed us that philosophy is not merely an academic exercise, but a way of life, a path to transformation that remains as relevant today as it was in ancient Athens. Consider how Plato's vision speaks to our contemporary struggles. We live in an age of information overload, where facts and opinions swirl around us in endless confusion. Plato's distinction between knowledge and opinion, between the realm of eternal truth and the world of shifting appearances, offers a framework for navigating this chaos. His allegory of the cave reminds us that what we take for reality may be merely shadows cast by deeper truths we have yet to discover. In our time of political polarization and moral relativism, Plato's insistence that there are objective standards of truth and goodness challenges us to rise above the merely conventional. His vision of the philosopher king, not as a tyrant who imposes his will, but as a servant who has glimpsed the good itself, offers an alternative to both populist demagoguery and technocratic expertise divorced from wisdom. In our age of materialism and consumerism, Plato's teaching that the soul is more real than the body, that wisdom is more valuable than wealth, that justice is more beautiful than success, calls us to examine our priorities and consider whether we are living for what truly matters. His understanding of love as the soul's recognition of its own divine nature offers a depth and meaning that no merely physical or psychological account can match. The scientific revolution has transformed our understanding of the physical world, but Plato's insights into the realm of mathematics and eternal truths remain remarkably relevant. His vision of mathematical objects as existing in a realm beyond the physical world anticipates modern discussions about the nature of mathematical truth. His understanding of the relationship between the eternal and the temporal speaks to contemporary debates about the nature of scientific laws and their relationship to particular phenomena. Even his seemingly archaic belief in the immortality of the soul addresses questions that remain pressing today. What is the nature of personal identity? What survives death? How should the possibility of survival after death influence how we live? These questions cannot be answered by science alone, but require the kind of philosophical reflection that Plato pioneered. But perhaps most importantly, Plato's vision of education as transformation rather than mere information transfer speaks directly to our current educational crisis. His understanding that true learning is not the passive reception of facts, but the active discovery of truths that lie dormant within the soul, offers a model for education that could revitalize our schools and universities. The academy that Plato founded was not a factory for producing specialists, but a community for cultivating wisdom. Its graduates were trained not merely in particular subjects, but in the art of thinking itself. They learned to see connections between different areas of knowledge, to recognize the unity that underlies apparent diversity, to trace all particular truths back to their source in eternal principles. This holistic approach to education is something our fragmented academic world desperately needs. We have become experts in knowing more and more about less and less, losing sight of the great questions that give meaning to all our particular investigations. Plato's vision reminds us that the purpose of education is not merely to train workers or even to advance knowledge, but to transform human beings into lovers of wisdom who can see life steadily and see it whole.
The dialogues themselves offer a model for how such transformation might occur. They are not treatises that present conclusions, but conversations that invite participation. The reader is drawn into the philosophical process itself, experiencing the confusion and clarity, the false starts and genuine insights that characterize the search for truth. This is education as Plato understood it, not the transmission of ready-made answers, but the awakening of the questioning spirit that lies at the heart of all genuine learning.
The dramatic setting of the dialogues is crucial to their effect. Philosophy emerges not in the abstract, but in the concrete circumstances of human life. The Republic grows out of a conversation at a religious festival. The Phaedrus unfolds in the countryside on a summer day. The symposium takes place at a drinking party. This reminds us that philosophy is not separate from life, but is life examined and lived at its deepest level.
The characters in the dialogues are not mere mouthpieces for philosophical positions, but fully realized human beings with their own personalities, motivations, and limitations. Socrates himself is portrayed not as a perfect sage, but as a man struggling to understand, sometimes confused, sometimes playful, always committed to the search for truth. This humanizes philosophy and makes it accessible to ordinary people who might otherwise be intimidated by its apparent abstractness.
The literary quality of the dialogues is itself philosophical. Plato understood that truth is not merely logical, but also aesthetic, that beauty and goodness are inseparably connected. His prose combines the precision of logical argument with the power of poetic imagery, creating works that speak to the whole person rather than merely to the intellect. This integration of reason and imagination, of logic and poetry, is characteristic of Plato's entire approach to philosophy.
The myths that appear throughout the dialogues serve a similar function. They are not primitive superstitions, but sophisticated attempts to express truths that cannot be captured in purely logical terms. The myth of the charioteer in the Phaedrus, the myth of the metals in the Republic, the myth of Atlantis in the Timaeus. These are not intended as literal descriptions, but as symbols that point toward realities too deep for ordinary language.
This use of myth reflects Plato's understanding that human beings are not purely rational creatures, but possess imagination, emotion, and intuition, as well as reason. The philosopher must speak to all these aspects of human nature, not merely to the logical faculty. This is why Plato's philosophy is not merely a set of arguments, but a vision of life that can inspire and transform.
The Timaeus, Plato's great cosmological dialogue, demonstrates this integration of reason and imagination on the largest possible scale. Here, Plato presents his vision of the cosmos as a living creature, created by a divine craftsman who used the eternal forms as his pattern. The dialogue combines sophisticated mathematical and astronomical speculation with mythological imagery, creating a picture of the universe that is both scientifically informed and spiritually meaningful.
The world soul described in the Timaeus is not a primitive animistic notion, but a sophisticated attempt to understand the rational structure that underlies all natural phenomena. The mathematical harmonies that govern the movements of the planets are expressions of the same rational principles that govern the movements of the human soul. This vision of cosmic harmony reflects Plato's conviction that the universe is not a random collection of atoms, but a rational order that can be understood by the human mind, because both mind and cosmos share in the same divine rationality.
This cosmic vision provides the ultimate context for Plato's understanding of human life and human destiny. We are not accidents in an indifferent universe, but parts of a cosmic drama that has meaning and purpose. Our souls are fragments of the world's soul, and our journey through life is part of the universe's own journey toward greater perfection and understanding.
The goal of human life, according to this vision, is to align ourselves with the cosmic order, to make our souls harmonious reflections of the harmony that governs the entire universe. This is achieved through the practice of philosophy, which enables us to see our place in the cosmic scheme and to live in accordance with our true nature as rational beings. This vision of philosophy as cosmic piety, as the recognition of our place in the rational order of the universe, is one of Plato's most profound contributions to human thought. It offers an alternative to both the narrow materialism that sees human beings as merely complex machines and the subjective idealism that makes each individual the measure of all things. Instead, it presents a vision of human dignity grounded in our participation in eternal truth, of human purpose defined by our role in the cosmic quest for understanding.
The influence of this vision can be traced through the entire history of Western thought. The Neoplatonists developed it into a comprehensive system of cosmic emanation. The Church Fathers used it to articulate Christian theology. The Renaissance humanists drew on it to defend the dignity of human nature. The Romantic poets found in it a source of inspiration for their vision of the unity of all existence.
Even secular thinkers who reject Plato's metaphysics often find themselves drawn to his vision of the philosophical life. The idea that human beings have a capacity for transcending their immediate circumstances, that there are truths worth pursuing for their own sake, that the examined life is the only life worth living. These insights continue to resonate even in our supposedly post-metaphysical age. The academy that Plato founded became the model for all subsequent institutions of higher learning. The word academic itself derives from the name of his school. The ideal of the university as a community of scholars devoted to the pursuit of truth for its own sake, the notion that education should be liberal rather than merely vocational, the conviction that knowledge is valuable in itself, apart from any practical application. All these ideas can be traced back to Plato's academy.
But the academy was more than an educational institution. It was a way of life, a community of people who had committed themselves to the philosophical quest. Its members were bound together not by external regulations, but by their shared love of wisdom. They supported each other in the difficult task of self-examination and mutual criticism that the philosophical life requires.
This sense of philosophy as a communal enterprise is essential to Plato's vision. Truth is not something that can be achieved in isolation, but emerges through dialogue, through the meeting of minds committed to honest inquiry. The philosopher needs others not merely as sources of information, but as partners in the search for understanding. The very structure of the Platonic dialogue reflects this conviction that truth is discovered through conversation rather than through solitary reflection. The Academy continued this tradition of philosophical dialogue for nearly 1,000 years. It survived the fall of classical Athens, the rise of Hellenistic kingdoms, the expansion of the Roman Empire, and the triumph of Christianity. Generation after generation of students came to learn not just what Plato had taught, but how to carry on the philosophical conversation that he had initiated. The eventual closure of the Academy marked the end of an era, but not the end of Plato's influence.
His works were preserved and studied throughout the medieval period, transmitted through Islamic and Jewish scholars to the emerging universities of medieval Europe. The Renaissance saw a revival of Platonic studies, and the modern world has continued to grapple with the questions he raised.
In our own time, Plato's influence can be seen in fields as diverse as mathematics, physics, psychology, and political theory. His vision of mathematical objects as existing in a realm beyond the physical world has been taken up by contemporary philosophers of mathematics. His understanding of the relationship between eternal principles and temporal phenomena speaks to debates in theoretical physics about the nature of natural laws. His insights into the structure of the soul have influenced depth psychology and psychotherapy. His political philosophy continues to challenge both democratic and authoritarian ideologies.
But perhaps most importantly, Plato's vision of the philosophical life continues to inspire individuals who seek meaning and purpose in an often chaotic world. His conviction that there are truths worth pursuing for their own sake, that the human soul has a capacity for transcendence, that love and wisdom are ultimately the same. These insights speak to something deep within the human spirit that no amount of scientific progress or technological innovation can satisfy.
The cave allegory remains one of the most powerful images in all of philosophy, precisely because it captures something essential about the human condition. We are all prisoners in the cave of our own limitations, mistaking shadows for reality. But we also possess the capacity to break free from our chains, to turn toward the light, to see things as they truly are. This capacity for transcendence is what makes us human, what distinguishes us from the other animals, what gives our lives meaning and purpose.
The philosopher is simply someone who has chosen to exercise this capacity systematically and rigorously. But the philosophical impulse itself is universal. Every human being, at some point in their life, asks the fundamental questions that philosophy addresses. What is real? What is good? What is beautiful? How should I live? The philosopher is distinguished not by asking these questions, but by refusing to accept easy answers, by following the argument wherever it leads, by maintaining the spirit of inquiry in the face of uncertainty and complexity. This is why Plato's philosophy remains relevant to our contemporary world. We live in an age of rapid change where traditional certainties have been called into question and new challenges emerge daily. In such circumstances, the philosophical virtues that Plato championed, intellectual honesty, moral courage, the willingness to examine our assumptions, the capacity for self-criticism, become more important than ever.
The vision of education as transformation, rather than mere information transfer, is particularly relevant in our age of information overload. We have unprecedented access to facts and data, but we often lack the wisdom to understand what it all means. Plato's emphasis on the development of judgment, on the cultivation of the capacity to see connections and relationships, on the integration of knowledge with character, offers a model for education that could help us navigate the complexities of contemporary life.
The dialogues themselves provide a model for the kind of discourse that our polarized society desperately needs. They show us how to engage in serious conversation about fundamental questions without demonizing those who disagree with us. They demonstrate that it is possible to challenge someone's views while respecting their dignity as a human being. They illustrate how genuine learning can occur when people are willing to examine their assumptions and follow the argument wherever it leads.
The figure of Socrates, as presented in Plato's dialogues, embodies the virtues that such discourse requires. He is intellectually rigorous without being arrogant, passionate about truth without being dogmatic, willing to admit his ignorance without being skeptical about the possibility of knowledge. He treats his interlocutors with respect while challenging them to think more deeply about their beliefs. He combines humility about his own limitations with confidence in the power of reason to illuminate the human condition.
This Socratic model of philosophical discourse is desperately needed in our contemporary world. We live in an age of sound bites and social media posts where complex issues are reduced to slogans and nuanced positions are dismissed as equivocation. The Platonic dialogue offers an alternative, a model of sustained, serious conversation about the questions that matter most. The vision of the philosopher king, controversial as it may be, also speaks to contemporary concerns about leadership and expertise. In an age of populist distrust of experts and technocratic dismissal of popular wisdom, Plato's insistence that authority should be based on knowledge rather than mere opinion or technical skill offers a third way. The philosopher king is not someone who has mastered a particular technique, but someone who has glimpsed the good itself and can therefore see the relationships between different areas of knowledge and value. Such a leader would combine the intellectual virtues of the expert with the moral virtues of the saint. They would be motivated not by the desire for power or glory, but by love of wisdom and compassion for those they serve. They would make decisions based not on polling data or partisan advantage, but on their understanding of what is truly good for the community as a whole. Of course, Plato himself recognized that such philosopher kings are unlikely to exist in the actual world. The Republic acknowledges that the ideal state is probably impossible to achieve on Earth. But the vision serves as a standard by which we can measure actual leaders and find them wanting. It reminds us that political authority should be based on wisdom rather than mere cleverness, on moral insight rather than mere technical competence.
The theory of forms, however abstract it may seem, also continues to speak to contemporary concerns. In an age of relativism and subjectivism, Plato's insistence that there are objective standards of truth, goodness, and beauty provides a foundation for rational discourse and moral judgment. The forms are not human constructions, but eternal realities that exist independently of our opinions about them. This does not mean that we have direct access to these eternal truths or that human knowledge is infallible. Plato was well aware of the limitations of human understanding, but he insisted that our limitations do not negate the existence of objective truth. The fact that we see the forms only dimly, as through a glass darkly, does not mean that they do not exist. The philosopher's task is to see them as clearly as possible and to help others do the same.
The theory of recollection, with its implication that learning is really remembering, speaks to contemporary discussions about the nature of human knowledge and the relationship between innate and acquired abilities. The idea that we possess a capacity for recognizing truth when we encounter it, that education is really a process of drawing out what is already within us, challenges both blank slate theories of the mind and purely constructivist approaches to learning.
The vision of love as the soul's recognition of its own divine nature offers a profound alternative to purely physical or psychological accounts of human relationships. In an age of casual hookups and utilitarian marriages,
Plato's understanding of love as a spiritual reality that connects us to eternal truth provides a deeper foundation for human intimacy and commitment.
The symposium's teaching that love is the desire for immortality speaks to something fundamental in human nature. The sense that we are meant for more than mere biological existence, that our deepest relationships transcend the merely temporal. This is not a denial of the physical dimension of love, but a recognition that even physical love points towards spiritual realities that give it meaning and significance.
The dialogue's famous speech by Aristophanes, with its myth of the origin of love as the search for our other half, captures something essential about the human experience of romantic love. We do feel incomplete. We do seek in another person something that we lack in ourselves. We do experience love as a kind of recognition rather than mere attraction. Plato's genius was to see that this psychological reality points toward a metaphysical truth about the nature of the soul and its relationship to eternal reality. The ascent of love described in the symposium, from physical attraction to spiritual communion to love of wisdom itself, provides a model for the integration of different aspects of human experience. It shows how physical desire can be transformed into spiritual aspiration without being denied or suppressed. It demonstrates how particular relationships can become stepping stones to universal love without being devalued or abandoned. This vision of love as education, as a process of mutual transformation that leads both lover and beloved toward greater wisdom and goodness, offers a profound alternative to both romantic idealism and cynical realism. It recognizes the power of love to transform human beings, while acknowledging the need for that transformation to be guided by reason and oriented toward objective truth. The Phaedrus, with its famous image of the soul as a charioteer trying to control two horses, provides a psychological model that remains remarkably relevant to contemporary discussions of human motivation and self-control. The rational part of the soul, represented by the charioteer, must learn to direct the spirited and appetitive parts, represented by the horses, toward appropriate objects. This is not a matter of suppressing emotion and desire, but of educating them, of helping them recognize what is truly worthy of their energy and attention. The noble horse, representing the spirited part of the soul, naturally desires honor and glory. The ignoble horse, representing the appetitive part, naturally desires pleasure and satisfaction. The task of reason is not to destroy these desires, but to show them how they can be fulfilled in ways that are consistent with the soul's true nature and ultimate good. This psychological model offers a middle way between the extremes of rationalism and emotivism. It recognizes that human beings are not purely rational creatures, but also acknowledges the importance of reason in guiding and directing our emotional and appetitive natures. It shows how the different parts of the soul can work together harmoniously when properly ordered, creating the internal peace and stability that Plato identifies with justice. The dialogue's discussion of rhetoric and its relationship to truth is particularly relevant in our age of spin doctors and propaganda. Plato distinguishes between true rhetoric, which seeks to persuade people of what is actually true and good, and false rhetoric, which seeks to persuade people regardless of truth or goodness. True rhetoric is based on knowledge of the soul and its needs, false rhetoric on mere cleverness and manipulation. This distinction is crucial for understanding Plato's relationship to democracy. He was not opposed to persuasion as such, but to persuasion that was divorced from truth and goodness. The philosopher king must be able to communicate effectively with the citizens, but this communication must be based on genuine knowledge rather than mere opinion or political expediency. The Phaedrus also contains Plato's famous critique of writing, which he presents as inferior to spoken dialogue because it cannot respond to questions or adapt to the needs of particular listeners.
This critique has taken on new relevance in our digital age, where written communication increasingly dominates human interaction. Plato's concern was that written texts could be misunderstood or misused, that they could create the illusion of knowledge without genuine understanding. The irony, of course, is that we know Plato's philosophy primarily through his written dialogues. But the dialogues themselves are designed to overcome the limitations of written communication by recreating the experience of philosophical conversation. They draw the reader into the philosophical process itself, forcing them to grapple with questions rather than simply absorbing information. This interactive quality of the dialogues is one of their most remarkable features. They do not present us with finished philosophical systems, but with philosophical thinking in action. We see how ideas develop through conversation, how questions lead to new questions, how apparent solutions reveal new problems. This process of inquiry is as important as any particular conclusion that might be reached. The open-ended nature of many of the dialogues reflects Plato's understanding that philosophy is not a body of doctrine to be memorized, but a way of life to be lived. The questions he raises are not problems to be solved once and for all, but challenges that each generation must face anew. The insights he offers are not final truths, but invitations to further inquiry. This is why Plato's philosophy remains alive and relevant after more than 2 millennia. It does not offer us easy answers, but rather teaches us how to ask better questions. It does not provide us with a comfortable worldview, but challenges us to examine our assumptions and expand our horizons. It does not promise us certainty, but shows us how to live creatively and meaningfully in the face of uncertainty. The ultimate message of Plato's philosophy is that human life has meaning and purpose, that we are not mere accidents in an indifferent universe, but participants in a cosmic drama that has both direction and significance. This meaning is not imposed upon us from outside, but discovered through the exercise of our highest capacities, reason, love, and the sense of beauty that draws us toward truth. The philosophical life that Plato advocated is not an escape from the world, but a deeper engagement with it. The philosopher who has glimpsed the eternal forms does not withdraw from temporal concerns, but returns to help others make the same journey. The cave allegory emphasizes that the philosopher has a responsibility to share what they have learned, even at the risk of being misunderstood or rejected. This sense of responsibility to others is what distinguishes Plato's philosophy from mere intellectual curiosity or mystical contemplation. Philosophy is not a private pursuit, but a public service, not a luxury for the privileged few, but a necessity for human flourishing. The philosopher serves the community by helping its members see more clearly, think more rigorously, and live more wisely. The academy that Plato founded embodied this understanding of philosophy as both individual transformation and social service. Its graduates went on to become teachers, statesmen, and reformers, carrying the philosophical spirit into every area of human life. They understood that the pursuit of wisdom was not separate from the pursuit of justice, that the love of truth was inseparable from the love of humanity. This integration of contemplation and action, of theory and practice, of individual development and social responsibility is perhaps Plato's greatest contribution to human civilization. He showed us that we need not choose between the life of the mind and the life of action, between personal fulfillment and social commitment, between the pursuit of truth and the pursuit of justice. The vision of the good life that emerges from Plato's philosophy is one of harmonious development, the cultivation of all our capacities in proper relationship to one another and to the eternal truths that give life meaning. This is not a life of ease or comfort, but a life of constant growth, challenge, and service. It is a life oriented toward the highest and best, a life that finds its fulfillment in the recognition of our kinship with the divine.
As we stand at the threshold of our own age of uncertainty and change, Plato's voice calls to us across the centuries with undiminished power. He reminds us that we are more than we appear to be, that we have capacities for transcendence that no external circumstances can destroy, that we are called to a destiny greater than anything we can imagine. His philosophy offers us not escape from the human condition, but the means to fulfill it. Not answers to all our questions, but the courage to keep questioning. Not certainty about the future, but confidence in the ultimate meaningfulness of our existence.
The fire that Plato glimpsed behind the appearances of things continues to burn, continues to call us toward truth, beauty, and goodness. It is the same fire that ignited the soul of Socrates, that inspired the founding of the Academy, that has illuminated the path of seekers throughout the ages. It burns still, waiting for us to turn away from the shadows and walk toward the light, to become philosophers in the truest sense, lovers of wisdom who have learned to see with the eyes of the soul, to love with the heart of eternity, and to live with the courage of those who know that truth is stronger than death, that beauty is more real than ugliness, and that goodness is the ultimate law of existence. Listen then to this ancient voice speaking truths that are eternally new. Let yourself be drawn into the great conversation that began in the streets of Athens and continues wherever human beings gather to ask the deepest questions and seek the highest truths. For in that conversation, in that eternal dialogue between souls who love wisdom, lies the hope of humanity and the promise of our divine destiny. The fire burns on, and we are its guardians, its witnesses, its living flames.